The Super Tuscan story begins shortly after World War II, when Mario Incisa della Rocchetta, who was an agronomist by trade, moved to Bolgheri, Italy, to live on a property that his wife had inherited. This property's name? Tenuta San Guido. Mario was interested in planting lots of different things on his property, including a variety of fruit trees, but also grapes for wine production. Mario was familiar with the Sangiovese that was being produced in Tuscany at the time, but not only was that Sangiovese largely uninspiring, but those Sangiovese grapes were not well suited to the coastal climate in Bolgheri. Consequently, Mario decided to go to Bordeaux to visit some family friends at Mouton Rothschild. Mario stayed with Mouton Rothschild and learned how to make wine. Once he returned to Bolgheri, he decided that his vineyards needed to be a little bit more inland and also on stony soils. So he found a spot that was well suited to the production of winemaking grapes, that was about 400 meters above sea level, and had very, very stony soils, much like those in Bordeaux. Mario named this vineyard Sasakaya, which means area of many stones. Mario began producing wines for personal consumption in 1945, and that continued through 1967. It wasn't until the mid-60s or so that Mario began consulting with the winemaker for Antinori. These discussions with Antinori's winemaker eventually led to the production of the first commercial release of Sasakaya in 1968. In 1978, just 10 years later, Decanter magazine had a wine competition that included a number of the top Cabernet-based wines, including the 1972 Sasakaya, but also 33 other wines from 11 different countries. The winner of this competition? The 1972 Sasakaya. Then, about a decade later, the 1985 vintage of Sasakaya received a 100-point score from well-known critic Robert Parker, who compared the wine to the 1986 Mouton Rothschild, which is an absolutely tremendous wine. Like the Mouton Rothschild wines, the Sasakaya wines were predominantly Cabernet Sauvignon, but also included a little bit of Cabernet Franc, most vintages. Tenuta San Guido makes 3 wines today that I'll be discussing, the first of which is the legendary Sasakaya wine. This wine is referred to as DOC Bolgheri Sasakaya because in 2014, Sasakaya actually received its own DOC classification. The regulations for the Bolgheri Sasakaya DOC require that the wine be made from a minimum of 80% Cabernet Sauvignon and that the wine undergo a minimum of 24 months of maturation, 18 months of which must be in 225-liter oak barrels. Oftentimes the blend for Sasakaya will be around 85% Cabernet Sauvignon, and it's not uncommon for them to include some Cabernet Franc as well, oftentimes around 15% or so. One of my favorite ideas for a blind tasting, and one that I highly recommend that everyone try, is to do a blind tasting where you have a wine like Sasakaya mixed in a group with a Napa Cabernet and a Bordeaux wine, ideally from the same vintage. It's quite fascinating to compare these wines, and I've found that Sasakaya oftentimes is a middle ground between the Bordeaux and the Napa Cabernet. It will oftentimes have a bit more fruit than the Bordeaux, but it will have higher acidity and more grippy tannins than the Cabernet from Napa Valley. If you're interested in wine recommendations, wine collecting strategies, and learning more about wine, please do subscribe to my channel. I've been collecting wine for more than 15 years and also have a level 4 diploma from the WSET. So I have both formal certification as well as substantial practical knowledge from the School of Hard Knocks. I first started buying Sassicaia and other Super Tuscan wines with the 2009 and 2010 vintages. Not only were these vintages outstanding, but at the time Bordeaux prices had just gone through the roof and Napa Valley Cabernet prices were quite high as well. So at the time, many of these Super Tuscan wines, such as Sassicaia, were selling for quite close to $100 or so, oftentimes around $110 a bottle, and Tignanello was even under $100. So certainly excellent values, and also excellent values relative to other wines that were of comparable quality. Unfortunately, however, prices on Super Tuscan wines and on Sassicaia especially started to skyrocket shortly thereafter. And now the price of new releases is around $275 or so. Some of my favorite vintages for Sassicaia include 1985, 1996, 2001, 2006, 2009 and 10, 2013, 2015 and 2016, and 2018 and 2019. For those who are interested in getting a feel for the house style of Sasakaya, they do have a second wine that's called Guidalberto, and which sells for a much more reasonable price, oftentimes around $50 or $60 or so. This wine is a blend of Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot. Sasakaya also has a third wine that's called Identifies. This one is even less expensive, and it's meant to be consumed either on release or within the first couple of years. This one will cost around $40 to $45.